Hi, I'm David Tarkington. I'm the pastor at First Baptist Church of Orange Park, Florida. I'm here with our Director of Missions here at First Baptist, Kenzie Allen, and our special guest, John Robinson, who is the General Director for the mission agency known as Linguæ Christi. We are having a one-hour mission conference today to introduce you and others to the ministry of Linguæ Christi that serves in Europe to reach people who speak minority languages. So, John, thank you for joining us today. The way we're doing this in this era, of course, is through Zoom call and digital meetings. So thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to it.
John, we are proudly partnered with you here at First Baptist Church and the ministry of Linguæ Christi, but a lot of people may not be aware of this mission agency and the work that you do. Could you succinctly give us a description of the unique mission for Linguæ Christi?
Sure. Let me give you a few things that will help you understand who we are and what we do. Of course, let me translate the name that we have for our organization. First, Linguæ Christi simply means the languages of Christ in Latin. And probably the first thing you need to know about us is that we're missionary. We're all about going, sending, sharing the message, which is the good news of Jesus Christ. And we want to see new disciples made, new churches planted, existing churches strengthened. But we do have a specific geographic focus. We work in Europe, which would be Greenland and Portugal to the west, all the way to the tip of Siberia in the east. And of course, there are a lot of missions agencies that have a specific focus like that, so that's not unusual. What is probably more unusual is our people group focus. We focus exclusively on speakers of indigenous minority languages here in Europe. Now, a lot of friends in the States would ask me, is that sort of like we have language churches in the States? We have maybe a Spanish-speaking church or Korean-speaking church. And I would say our situation would be more like having a Navajo-speaking church or a Cherokee-speaking church. These would be the indigenous peoples of Europe who speak one of the minority languages, not one of the big majority languages. So in our missions work, we sort of have three foci. One is as an agency, in other words, boots on the ground, recruiting, sending, and helping people serve in a particular place or with a particular people group. So that's one of the ways that we would do it, and that would be familiar to most people. Second would be as a network, because we want to get people together who are interested in reaching these people groups. And for us, it doesn't matter who reaches them, as long as somebody is reaching them. And finally, it's advocacy and education. We simply have to tell people about the existence of these people groups and their need for the gospel, because a lot of people have never heard of them. So that should give you a quick little overview of who we are and what we do.
John, why don't you just, if you could, just take a moment and tell us how you ended up where you are there in Wales, northern Wales, where you live now, and the work that you're doing.
Well, it's one of those things that early on in my Christian life, I felt a strong call to ministry. And I used to interpret that to mean staying at home in Tennessee and pastoring a small church, maybe bivocationally or something like that. But then I had the opportunity to go to Eastern Europe, and I loved that experience. But then the Lord sort of closed that door and opened one to come to Wales. And when I first came to Wales, I was working with the Baptist Union of Wales as their evangelism officer. And part of the assignment was learning Welsh to fluency. So that was an interesting aspect of moving to Wales for me, was the language. And right from the beginning, learning the language and using it. It's been a very rewarding experience in and of itself. But that's the lightning version of how I got here. And I have stayed. I became a British citizen. I have 2 passports. So I feel very much at home here at Wales now.
John, you've mentioned these languages and the people groups. How many people groups or how many different languages are we talking about?
Well, again, we're speaking specifically about indigenous minority languages. So we're not talking about the big majority languages that are indigenous to Europe, like French in France or German in Germany or Norwegian in Norway. But we're talking about these smaller languages Many times they're represented by sort what we would call stateless nations. They're a nation in everything, but having an actual expression in the form of a nation state. And many times they feel sort of impressed upon by the majority. In other words, they feel sometimes the majority language is sort of pushing them into a corner linguistically and culturally. So we're looking at those indigenous minority groups, those places and people groups and languages. And if you're looking at it that way, you're looking at about 100 million people in this geographic area that I've described, who would speak one of these indigenous minority languages as their heart language, as their first language, their preferred language. And that's spread out over at least 165 distinct language families. Well, not families, but language groups or languages in and of themselves in their own right. So it's pretty vast, isn't it? It's vast geographically, it's vast in terms of population, and it's complex due to all of the different languages that are quite obscure, to be honest, for most people who have never heard of them before. So this video is by our friend Hoshan, who is in the Basque Country, and he's basically talking about the partnership that they've had between their organization, Kale Argia, and Linguæ Christi, and especially how there's now a Welsh connection. And being able to see all these things happening in the Welsh language was an inspiration for them to do the same thing in Basque.
Kaixo, Euskal Herritik eskerrak eman behar dizkizuegu, zen oso aberatsa izan zen gure bisita Galesen ikusteko anai arrebak bere hizkuntzan, bere herrian, fedezko komunidadeak eraikitzen, eta guretzat izan zen biztuera, nolabait sua biztutzea eta animatzea, hasi ginen bide berria, hortan jarraitzeko eta eraikitzeko. Eskerrik asko horregatik.
John, what are some of the languages that you would identify as some of the minority? Just as we're thinking about that, you know, we know the big ones. You've spoken of those: Germany, English, the primary languages. But what are some of those minority languages that might be unknown to those that are watching today?
Sure. Well, we sort of organize our work actually according to the linguistic connections that these languages have to each other. As you probably know, most languages are grouped into families of languages. In other words, they're sort of grouped together according to their history, how they developed, their similarities, that sort of thing. And that's how we look at it. So within the Celtic range, you have languages like Welsh, which is what I speak in my ministry here. You have Irish Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic, Breton, which is spoken in Brittany and France. This is the only Celtic language still spoken on the continent of Europe. But then if you move around Europe a little bit, moving more towards Spain and Portugal and the border of France right there, you have the Basque language, which is one of those isolates. It's not related to any other language in the world. But then you have languages like Galician or Gallego and also Catalan. And this is an interesting thing about these indigenous minorities, is that when you say minority, you think tiny. These are tiny little groups, and there are 10 people who speak this language in a village someplace. But there are actually more speakers of Catalan than there are Norwegian. But it's a minority language. So you have several million people speaking Catalan. Galician, you have at least 2.5 million speaking this language. But if you move around like to Italy, you have languages in the north like Piemontese, Dolomitic Ladin, Friulian, and all of these different languages. I often say it sounds like we're talking about Star Trek or something like that, because the Mingrelians are coming, or the Karelians. It sounds like made up names, but these are actual languages and language groups. So I could go on. I won't name all 165 for you right now, but that gives you an example of some larger languages in this area, but they're everywhere across Europe.
John, when we talk about heart language, which I think you mentioned before, what exactly does that mean?
I'm glad you asked that, because that is sort of at the center of everything we do. You'll hear people use the term heart language or mother tongue or first language, a preferred language. Basically, when we use this term, heart language, we're talking about that means of communication that is closely tied to a person's identity. It's what they would use with their family, with their close friends, even with their work colleagues, the people they know. There's a sense of cohesion that comes from using that language. Now, they're probably going to speak another language, sometimes another couple of languages, but it's that heart language. Spiritually speaking, I've heard someone say that a heart language would be that if you were in the middle of the night, in distress in your soul, and you were to cry out to God, what language would you use? That's usually people's heart language. It's where they communicate their deepest thoughts. Now, this sometimes is very difficult for Americans who don't come from either a Native American background or an immigrant community to understand. Because let's say you're Polish American and your grandmother speaks Polish and you go to her house every Sunday, you probably know enough Polish that you can talk to grandma. So you have that sense of having two languages in your life. But for most Americans, there's one language. And so they sometimes struggle with the idea of a heart language when you have people who speak a heart language, but then a majority language as well, a trade language of sorts. So that's how I would describe a heart language or mother tongue or other term that you might use to describe it.
Right. You mentioned there were 165 of these minority languages or heart languages. With there being a majority tongue that most people speak, why not just, share in that language, preach the gospel in that language instead of, trying to target all of the heart languages? What's the importance of that?
Well, that is a central question as well, because here in Wales, we get this, or whether you're in the Basque country with the Basque language, everyone says, well, everyone speaks English, or everyone speaks Spanish, or everyone speaks French as a second language, and they're usually quite proficient, fluent. So why bother with the heart language? And I think there are a number of reasons why it's important. One is, at a very fundamental level, the argument for having the gospel, the Bible, available to speakers of minority languages is the same as it is for any language. The Bible wasn't written in English. It was written in Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek, but we don't force English speakers to learn Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic just so they could read the Bible. It seems perfectly natural. We would want an English version. Why? Because it's our heart language. We want to be able to understand the Word of God. We want to be able to hear the gospel. We want to be able to worship in our heart language. Well, speakers of minority languages also have that desire. It's really the same argument. But another idea that might help us here is that there have been a lot of studies that show that the more you use the heart language, the deeper the gospel goes, and discipleship is much deeper and stronger in the lives of the hearers, because they say, it's for me. This is not for somebody else. It's for me. God is speaking to me in my heart language. And that is really profound. In fact, there have been some studies to show that the further away you get from using the heart language, the greater the possibility for syncretism. So that's another reason why this is very important. And I think kind of maybe a final point why it's important because another way of looking at the question is to say, like for Welsh speakers, for example, who are first language Welsh speakers, but they also speak English, we're tempted to say, well, because they're so good in English, they're just as reachable through a second language or a third language as they are through their first language. Now, I would be the first one to admit people come to the Lord through their second language. That does happen. I'm not going to pretend that never happens. But what often happens, and if you look at it, and we're probably going to do some more real research on this in the future. Right now, it's more anecdotal, but a trend we tend to see is let's take that there is a community that is 60, 70% of the population that speaks the heart language, the minority language. Now, they would all speak Spanish or English or French as well, but it's a community. They would use the language in the community, but also speak the trade language as well. Now, let's say that there is one evangelical church in that community, but it uses the trade language. It uses the majority language. Now, let's say that even the Lord is blessing the work. People are coming to faith, they're joining. I would say, for people who say it makes no difference which language you use, I would say, if that's true, then how many of your members are first language speakers of the minority language? Because if you're actually reaching the community, you should have 60 or 70% of your congregation that would consider themselves first language speakers of the minority. But that tends not to be the case. Usually, if you have anybody, it's a handful of people that are speakers of the language. So it's not really true that people are as reachable through their second or third language as they are through their first language. It's all about making the gospel real to these people, and in such a way that they say, yeah, this really is a message for me. God is speaking to me directly in my language. He speaks my language, and this is so important.
All right, so we just heard the importance of the heart language. Why don't we take a minute to listen to 3 Christians who are going to share the importance in their own language.
Bem, eu sou uma pessoa nascida tardina da periloma ladins e ladin é mi rusneda de loma que lulas di prme que eu fez conch e que prei ladin e prme eu que este mi rusneda ou que mi corbat que j'ai la rusneda que eu rejoni com mi família que rejoni com mi moutons que rejoni com mi companhas.
Pois son Xaime Fernández, o director de Nacer de Novo, na Radio e da Televisión de Galicia. A miña lingua nai é o galego, con ela pois é co que me expreso tanto no traballo, na miña familia, no día a día, con todas as persoas normalmente que me encontro por todas as partes, cando un vai comprar, cando un vai pola rúa. Ademais, cos meus amigos, algúns dos meus mellores amigos están aquí en Galicia, entón nos expresamos en galego, e é a nosa lingua do día a día, en todos os momentos. E tamén no uso da Biblia en galego, tanto no programa de televisión como na radio.
Pam ddoth y cynhadon o America y tro cynta efo criw John Robinson a falle, mi o'n i efo gymaint o edmygedd bod y bobl yma nid yn unig wedi dysgu Cymraeg, ond wedi dysgu Cymraeg yn rhugl mwyn cael sgwrs ddofn yn Gymraeg. A nes i feddwl pam bod rhain wedi mynd i gymaint o ymdrech i ddysgu Cymraeg? Pam? A wedyn, erbyn i fi ddod i adnabod yr eglwys yn well, y Beibl yn well, y cymdeithas a yn y capel a gair Duw yn well, nes i sylweddoli yn ara bach pa mor bwysig ydy bod y Beibl yn y iaith Gymraeg. I mi, siŵr iawn, mae Iesu Grist yn siarad Cymraeg. Dyna sydd yn y Beibl a dyna sydd dwi'n gweld Iesu Grist yn siarad yn Gymraeg. Felly, os dwi'n darllen Beibl yn Saesneg, mae o yn mynd yn fwy anghyfarwydd i mi, oherwydd dwi'n dechrau meddwl, Iesu Grist yn siarad Saesneg, felly bod hynny ddim yn berthnasol i mi. Wrth gwrs, dwi'n gwybod oedd o ddim yn Saesneg chwaith, ond mae'n rhyfedd ydy pan da chi'n dod i nabod person, mae o'n siarad yr un iaith â chi, a dyna sydd dwi wedi dod i nabod Iesu.
A verdade é que temos moitas historias de moitas persoas que teñen escoitado a mensaxe en galego e que eso realmente lles impactou. De feito, cando editamos o Evangelio de San Xoán en galego, pois foi algo que moitas persoas nos agradeceron por poder ler as palabras do Señor Xesús na súa propia lingua. Lembro aquel momento que Paulo está nunha situación complicada no libro dos Feitos dos Apóstoles e ninguén quere escoitalo, pero a propia Biblia nos di que cando el lles falou na súa lingua, no hebreo que falaban en aquel momento, pois todos prestaron atención, porque se dieron conta de que era un dos seus. Entón, poder proclamar o Evangelio e que as persoas te escoiten comprendendo que somos un deles é unha das cousas máis importantes. Por eso o Señor Xesús falaba en arameo coas persoas que estaban con el, na lingua que eles comprendían e, sobre todo, na lingua que eles falaban habitualmente. E temos que facer un esforzo para non só falar na nosa lingua, que para iso non necesitamos moito, pero tamén para prover materiais e para que nos medios de comunicación e na proclamación da mensaxe do Evangelio usemos a nosa lingua. Moitas grazas por orar por nós.
Al moment nos drunat lieges cristians de Gdaina ratni anche avei badiocio vian fascia o tautri postula clivan rujna ladin ma musan chdi que naus son usei a rujne italian o tudask kan knaus jont nosta lies da pitling sus ons usei a fecal. Ja, primer fos kaj cik kim savas bela vaina dlieja la kunis rujna ladin. Nseniash kaj fos na gran importanza produciautri. Primer fos l'important.
Let me ask you this though, John. When we start talking about languages, and especially here in an evangelical perspective, we tend to think about translations, and there are some great Bible translating ministries in our world, and even housed here and headquartered here in the state of Florida where we are. And sometimes, in my conversations with others, there is this misunderstanding that Linguæ Christi, though because it's a language-focused, minority language-focused ministry, that you are focused and your intent is Bible translation. So we have to kind of address that and check that, because that tends to be a box that people put you in as a translator, a Bible translating ministry. So how do you address that as Linguæ Christi?
We don't do Bible translation at all. Now, we think it's vitally important. Obviously, people need to have the Word of God in their language, but we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There are great organizations out there that do Bible translation. That's all they do. They're the experts on it. So why reinvent the wheel when there are already people there? We would rather partner with them and encourage them, do whatever we can, get people praying for those things, do whatever we can to get that moving forward and getting those translations done. But we would be more on the active side of it after the Bible's available. How do we get it into the hands and hearts of people in their heart language so they can read the Word, they can hear the gospel message, they can respond to it and grow in discipleship and worship and the whole full life of the church through their heart language. So it's an important ministry. We support it. We want to partner with the people who are the experts, but it's not what we do. We're the people who take it the next step in mission and evangelism and discipleship.
Different individuals have gone to Europe to serve with Linguæ Christi, and one young man who grew up in northern Wales was so impacted by the work of the ministry team that eventually he himself surrendered his life to Jesus Christ. And what's so exciting about him is he is a disciple of Jesus Christ, but he is a disciple who makes disciples, and he has such an impact on those that he is encountering at the university and where he lives in northern Wales. So why don't you just take a moment now and let's hear from Cam and let's hear his story.
Hi, I'm Cameron Jones. I'm here in Liverpool. Just going to give you the how come I came to faith question answer. Briefly, I'll keep it brief because it's a long story, so I'm going to keep it as short as I can. Essentially, I became friends with people that were believers, that were mates with Jesus, and I got alongside them as a friend. I saw how they lived. They were American, essentially came with the Celt organisation initially that's now changed into Linguæ Christi. Some of them decided to stay and to work in Wales for several years, and along that time I was pretty close with a lot of them that did stay, and essentially I gave my life to Jesus through just walking alongside them and asking so many questions. It didn't happen overnight, but it was just me constantly just being their friend and them being my friend, praying for me, as well as just reading with me, getting alongside me. And that's pretty much how I came to faith in a nutshell. From university now, and what I'm going to be doing in the future is, well, the future is a question mark, because I'm not sure what I'm meant to be doing. But I know I'm going to be alongside people, and I know my role, whatever that is going to be with people. I'm not made for a desk. I'm just not. People is clearly something that I feel that I'm meant to be doing, just walking alongside them in any way I can, and hopefully disciple people, have them come along and join the run. So yeah, that's everything in a nutshell. I'm Cameron Jones, out of here.
John, how long have you been in Northern Wales since, with Linguæ Christi, of course, but even the precursor with the Celtic Languages team? What year did you begin the ministry there, your ministry there in Wales?
I arrived in Wales in July of 1996. So next year is going to be 25 years living and serving in Wales. Like I said, when I first came, I was involved as the evangelism officer with the Baptist Union of Wales. So I was going around to different churches and trying to help them do church growth, to reach out to their communities, often through Welsh, and most often in Welsh-speaking churches, but also in English-speaking churches that were part of the union. But then also the IMB, which is the group I was serving with at the time, also went through some changes where they emphasized people groups, language groups, which is what we do, really. A lot of that comes from that influence. So I then took on the Celtic languages as part of my, I guess, my role with the IMB as a strategist. So that included the 6 Celtic languages. But then when we started Linguæ Christi as an independent organization, we simply took those principles and expanded them so that they would apply to all of the indigenous minority language groups in Europe. Because just as we moved out from Welsh to the other Celtic languages, it basically started with a question. Well, who's reaching people through Irish Gaelic? Who's reaching people through this language or that language? Who's reaching people through Basque? Who's reaching people through whatever language here? And we were finding that often there were very few people trying to reach them through their language that made sense to them. Often you'd find people who were using a second language, a trade language, but not as many people who were really trying to reach Catalan speakers through Catalan or Irish Gaelic speakers through Irish Gaelic, that sort of thing. So that's sort of the history of how it evolved from one role to the next. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And so in these 25 years of ministry in this focused mission for language missions, indigenous speakers, the European region, what would you, I mean, just a very, just a quick thumbnail, what would be the greatest impact you would say Linguæ Christi has made thus far? I know we have much to look for, but what would you say for right now in 25 years, your ministry, what was the greatest impact?
Well, that's quite the question. And I think it's probably more involved, and you know me, doing something succinctly or easily is not really my gift.
That's a loaded question.
My gift is taking one page of information and turning it into 10. But I would say a lot of the things that where we've really seen some growth and the Lord working has been through prayer. People coming to pray for an area, because I think it changes the spiritual temperature. I think it changes how people are looking at the gospel. And I think we have used prayer in ministry a lot. And I think another thing is using things that are natural interest based, like the basketball clinics, or people who love to do music or art or photography, whatever it is, to use their natural passions as a way of getting into just good conversations with people and always have a chance to lead the conversation toward Jesus somehow. And another one of the ways that we've done this is through our student projects, university students coming and serving with us in the summer months during their university holidays. That's been really exciting to see some of these relationships that have built, and we've seen, some people come to faith, or some Christians being strengthened in their faith through these kinds of interactions, and sort of I guess, a benefit that we weren't necessarily trying to do, but sort of happened, is that among all the students that we've had to serve with us over the years, we've had a really high number of them enter into full-time missions overseas someplace, or in full-time ministry in the US. So I've never crunched the numbers or done the math, but it seems a lot of people, having served in these contexts and really used their own passions and interests, and also skills in other ways to further the gospel. Oh, when they go back, this has translated into trying to do the same things when they're back in the States. And that has taken them the next step to mission service or to ministry in some way. So those are just a few things that come to mind right away of some of the impact long term.
That's pretty succinct for you, John. I'm impressed. That's good. You did a great job with that. So you've heard a lot about what's happening in Linguæ Christi. You've heard from some others that are on the field and have been impacted by the ministry. John Robinson is not the only one working with Linguæ Christi. He has a team of others who serve with him. Trey and Amelia McCain are primary leaders there in the region as well. And we also have, I believe, here just a brief clip of a young man who served on a team and how impactful this has been to him in his ministry there.
One of the things that Lingu Christi specifically during that summer, as I'm wrestling through ministry and really great and in a programming sense of running youth ministries and partnering with local churches and being on staff at churches. But what does it look like to live on mission? What does it look like to serve the Lord overseas? And that summer really transformed my life. And what I mean by that is what God did in and through me through that summer and serving with Lingu Christi was God opened up my mind and my eyes to see my life needs to be oriented around living life daily for Christ. And I think we say that phrase all the time, but what does it really look like to live life on mission? One of the things that I say all the time is I have this approach to disciple making, which is a relational life on life approach to disciple making. And this kind of helped me see, as I wake up, as I live day to day, how am I being a light for the gospel for the glory of Christ?
Hey, John, years ago we were talking, you shared a story with me about one of our pastors and churches here in the States that took a group to Northern Wales, where you are, and this pastor, I believe, led a basketball clinic at a local school, and the headmaster of the school was a basketball fan and loved to have him in. So the clinic went really well as you were having them there to do the clinic, the sports clinic for the children and for the students. But as is the case, most every church group or team that comes from the U.S. Are English speakers. They're not Welsh speakers. And so the gospel is still proclaimed, but you shared a story about I think it was a Q&A event that took place at the school where the pastor was sharing the gospel and sharing just his story, and some of the children stood up to ask a question. And if I remember this right, and maybe you should probably just tell the story, but the young man stood up and he had a question, but he was stuck on a word at that. Is that the story is that how you had shared that?
Yes, that is true. We had been doing a basketball clinic in the school, and then there was sort of an assembly time where the Welsh school children could ask questions, and there were, I guess, probably 7 to 10 years old. They're about that age group. So many of them spoke very good English, or sufficient English that they could express themselves. Now, you could hear that it was not their first language, because they're sort of looking for the words, but they were able to ask questions. And most of the questions were sort of fun things like, what are your holidays in America? Or what do you like to eat in America? Some of these types of things. Well, one young boy, I guess about 8 or 9 years old, stood up and he began to ask a question and just couldn't find the language. So he looked at the headmaster. He asked his question completely in Welsh, and then the headmaster had to translate it for him. And this isn't uncommon with children, young here, with projects that are involved with children, because many times they don't use English in the home. In their homes, everything is in Welsh. Most of the schools that they attend, it's all in Welsh. They learn English as a foreign language, and they're surrounded by it. You can't escape English because of the media and the television and the radio and things like that. But it really is their second language, and they're still developing their skills in English. So often we have to have someone who's going to be able to translate and keep that going for us. So it's a great example of the need to have the language. But the interesting thing is that even without the language, because even a team that was here for a week, we taught them enough Welsh that they could be polite. They could ask for something, they could say please and thank you and good morning. And they would use this just in the community, and people were astounded. They would say, "You're here on holiday," because that's what it looks like to them. And you know that we have a language, for one thing, and you can actually say a couple of words in Welsh. It would always open the door, and no one would expect somebody who's here for a week or 2 weeks or even a month to get fluent in Welsh. But they are always surprised when they hear somebody who speaks it. And this is true in many of the other language areas. Just take out Welsh and put in another language, and that experience is very similar.
Teams that go from the States serve in different areas with Linguæ Christi, and one of the areas is in a town in northern Wales. And the impact has been great in that town as systematically, year after year, individuals have come to serve. But one pastor, a dear friend of ours, John, he has shared how impactful the teams have been. Share a little bit about him, and I think we have a video that he's going to share his story as well.
Yes, that's right. The pastor is Chris, and he's actually the pastor at the Carsalem Baptist Chapel in Carnarvon, and that's where I'm a member, so he's my pastor. But he has known us many years. We've done many projects together, so I think you'll enjoy hearing from him and sort of his perspective on working together with the summer projects.
Hello friends, my name is Rhys Llwyd and I'm the pastor of Caersalem Baptist Church in Caernarfon, one of the local churches who partner with Linguæ Christi. We're a small church, but with a big vision. But we're low on resources and low also on personnel. So our partnership with Linguæ Christi and churches in America has benefited us greatly over the years by allowing us to bring people in, to give us extra manpower and help with practical tasks and tasks that help us connect with young people in our community. I'll just give you two examples how this partnership has blessed us in recent years. A few years ago, we had teams come over to do activities with young people, and those activities enabled us as a church to connect with young people in our town, people we wouldn't have the personnel to connect with usually. And from that, our youth work grew, and we saw a few people come to faith. Another way our partnership with Churches in America has helped us was to sort out our building. We had this grand, big, great old Welsh church that was crumbling around us, and we just didn't have the resources to sort the building out and make it fit for purpose for the 21st century. And a few years ago, we were blessed with a team who came over from Tennessee. They sent 15 strong men over who worked day and night for a week, and they helped us to sort out the building, have a new flooring, a new heating system, and now that building is used to bless the community and connect with people with the gospel. So that's just two examples about how our partnership with Linguæ Christi and Churches in America have blessed us as a church and hopefully shown the kingdom of Jesus here in Caernarfon. Thank you very much for your support and partnership.
So Kenzie, as our Director of Missions, one of your roles, one of your responsibilities is just discovering those places and our missionaries and when the right time to go on a trip, the type of short-term mission trip, even perhaps helping those that are feeling called into full-time Christian service as missionaries. I think you have some questions for John regarding the trips and the type of activities that Linguæ Christi can host.
Yeah, so as someone who has, as David mentioned, led multiple trips and been on several mission trips myself, there's usually a big project or an event or something you're planning for while you're there. What value do you see in groups who may travel to help Linguæ Christi, but never actually host, an event, a large gathering, or something of that nature?
Well, that is a good question, and I should probably say first, we're not technically against events, those types of things. But a lot of times the temptation is to let that be all you do, big events, going from one big event to the next, because we would say that a big event is only as useful in kingdom economy as the number of relationships that either lead to it or from it. So we're not 100% against it, but we want to be really strategic and find those types of events that would get more connection with people. But we find in general that having smaller groups, being more missional, going to places where people gather, sometimes it means going to a cafe, or sometimes it means going to a park and just playing ultimate frisbee or something together. And you'd be surprised at the people who will come in, get to know you, begin to talk with you, and it's a great opportunity to tell people, this is why I'm here. I'm here not to be just because Wales is a beautiful place to visit, but because we want to share what's most important to us with you, and that is our personal relationship with Jesus and the fact that he can save us and forgive us and make us citizens in a kingdom and give us purpose and a role for our lives. So we find that using people's interests, smaller type of things, sometimes smaller venues, that sort of thing. We still want to use things like sports and music or those types of things, but we find that kind of making it a little bit smaller, a bit more intimate in its focus, gives more opportunities for those kinds of deeper gospel conversations.
Sometimes that makes it a challenge for folks, especially as Kenzie has said, planning a traditional mission trip. When I say traditional, I only mean traditional in the sense that it's what most people are familiar with. It doesn't mean that it's better or it's worse or it's right or it's wrong. It's just the most familiar aspect. And when we do a trip or a trip is planned where a handful of people or even a large group may travel to northern Wales or in northern France or one of these locations, unless there is something pre-coordinated, some kind of festival or an event, it may be, as you said, just sitting in a cafe, drinking coffee and engaging people in conversations, which I will say is pretty radical in the sense that we often don't even do that here in the States. We live in a sequestered world where we go to work, go home, shut the garage door, don't engage even in with our neighbors in conversation about the gospel. And what I've discovered is that these very intentional yet not overly planned trips, and what I mean by that is we land, our boots are on the ground, we're working, and we're getting a missions strategy session and learning what we're supposed to be doing and how we're to engage in these conversations, but we're not always driven towards, and there's an event Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. It may be that this group's going to go here, that group's going to go there. This leads to another thing that we've talked about. When we land on the plane and we arrive there in town, it is very obvious that we're an American tourist group. I mean, that we have arrived there from their perspective, wherever it may be, we're on holiday or we're on vacation. We're just here to see these sites. And there are many Americans that show up there. So, John, what do you see? And from my perspective, I see some things, but what do you see from your perspective of the value, and I'm going to say this, hopefully it's not offensive, of playing tourist in these beautiful regions to engage, not covertly necessarily, but we are tourists, but to play that tourist role that, hey, we're not from around here. You can tell by our accent, you can tell by the way we dress, but we're so glad to be here. What's a benefit of being on mission as a tourist for those regions?
Well, I think there could be a number of things. I'll just try to keep it short as I can. I think in some ways it's some of the baggage that's attached to the term missionary that we have here, because there has been a glorious tradition of Christianity in many places in Western Europe. It's just diminished to the point that you have whole areas where you'd be hard pressed to find over half of 1% that would be evangelical Christian. So it's an interesting development. And still, though, for a lot of people in Europe, especially Christians who are evangelicals, when you say missions, that's supposed to be in Africa, or it's supposed to be in South America or in Asia. So having missionaries come here, it's not necessarily that people are antagonistic, they just don't really have a category for that. Also, the way we have people interact, we consider it missions because there's a gospel purpose here. The purpose is to get into conversations with people, but it doesn't really look like the typical missions types of things that you might do. So being able to come in this way is a way of being seen as positive. For example, you're tourists in the area, you're complimenting on them about their beautiful country and the interesting things about their history. You're learning as you're here on holiday, and you're enjoying yourself, and you're spending money. It is a help to the local economy. There's a practical side of this. So you're seen very positively from the very beginning. Now, when you start to use a few words of Welsh or Basque, that even strengthens the good impression that they have of you already. And then when you say, well, we're here partnering with this sort of church, and we're here to pray for people, that would even open up an opportunity to say, do you have anything going on in your life that I could pray for you right now about this? Sometimes that is a way of opening up a gospel conversation. But it's also a way of, you meet somebody as a tourist being in these places where people work and they live. And sometimes we've seen this translate into another appointment later on. They say, hey, could we meet for coffee after work? So I could ask you some more questions of why you've come all the way here to Wales, and you know a few words of Welsh, and you're believers in Jesus, and what does all that mean? And those conversations are generally very, very good, very productive. So that's one of the benefits of being able to come here and not look like the typical missions team. It just opens up more doors for you.
So it's not a bad idea to show up not wearing the same color t-shirts, right? Sometimes it's good just to look normal.
It is often good just to look normal. And I think that's one of the issues for a lot of people in a post-Christian culture. We say this especially with some of the teams that we've had that are high school age, because in most of our schools, there might be one or two really born-again believers, even in Welsh-speaking schools or Basque-speaking schools. And so people don't really know what to think. We often put it this way, that your average 16-year-old in many of these contexts has never met a believer his own age, a real sure enough follower of Jesus his own age, never met one, doesn't know what one looks like. So this is just another way of breaking down some of those walls and connecting.
We found great benefit in that, and I know Kenzie and we have some other questions for you. But when I think about the tourist way in, and which is how we're going in, we are touring the area, and we do see the beautiful sights. So we're going around, we're looking at the castles, we're understanding, going to museums, some of the culture and just the beauty of that. But there is this, I would say feigned, but it's not feigned, it's a naivete that we can offer and say, hey, you know, I'm here, I'm talking to you, I've learned this word, I want to talk to you about that, I want to use these Welsh terms, tell me how poorly I'm doing and laugh about it. And then ask just the honest questions. Hey, you know, where I'm from, we're a part of a church and we gather every week. And do you have a church? Do you attend church? And it's less threatening, we found in our own conversations, to begin the conversation out of curiosity, because even in Northern Wales, and it's the same in other areas that you are, I'm just talking about those primary places we've been, There is that great history of the Welsh revival, and there was a generation or a few generations back where the church was normative and they went, and now it's an empty building down the street, or it's boarded up, or it's a historical site, and it's such a rare thing to find a church or a chapel where there is gathering of people that are under the age of 80, perhaps. And I think we're a novelty to some degree of why would we even be interested in that. And that's what's so incredible about what we've seen happen with our Friends Church there in at Carsalem, because there is a rejuvenation, a renewal, a revival happening, I believe, even there among younger generations, where we're just a mission team. We're coming here for a season and we're coming home. But the long-term mission continues through Linguæ Christi and through the local churches and the locals there that know the Lord. It's been a great benefit for us to see that, and it's teaching my team and our church members and those that have been on these teams. It's been a way to teach them to have authentic conversations about the gospel that do not just have to happen overseas or over in another nation or another area, but can happen here at home as well. So it's twofold benefit in that regard.
John, we've talked about these teams going, and of course that's a great way that we can support you, but we're living in this pandemic right now, and we know that there's a lot of people and churches that have had to cancel all their trips and are just in areas where travel is limited or restricted, including where you are. So how, during this time, the pandemic we're living through, where travel is restricted, how can churches come alongside you and support your ministry?
Well, I'm very glad you asked that question, because I think the global pandemic has had believers and missions agencies and pastors all over the world kind of in shock a little bit. I think we all began with a bit of the deer in the headlights. It's like, well, okay, we can't have our projects this summer, or we can't have people moving from country to country. So there's sort of a little bit of that initial shock. What do we do? But the more we thought about it, and the longer the pandemic went, we thought, we need a lot of practical help with things, people using their skills. And most of the things that they can do to help us, they can do from home. They don't even have to leave. In fact, we have a whole category of service, which you can find on our website, that's called Volunteer from Home. And we're looking for people who may not have any specific skills, but they know how to get around the internet. Well, we can use them to help us do some searches for us, to help us do a little bit of research, to find some data for us. But then we're also looking for people who have some specific skills in areas like graphic design and art and accounting and bookkeeping and fundraising and grant writing, translation. There are all sorts of opportunities where people can be involved in something that's strategic, and they never have to leave home. So right now we have a number of opportunities, and I'll be honest, there are some projects that we're working on that we're kind of going slowly with them, or even not able really to jump in fully, because we need some help with some things, some specialized practical help. So yes, we have a lot of ways that people can plug in, even from home, during this COVID crisis.
Well, thank you for joining us for this 1-hour missions conference for Linguæ Christi. We normally this time of year have teams from the U.S. that arrive in northern Wales and other regions for a vision trip. I will take a group of pastors and mission leaders who might have interest in partnering with Linguæ Christi, just to get boots on the ground, to see what the work is that's being done and see what the region looks like, and really hear the language and understand the great need. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we are unable to travel this year, and we felt that this online video conference would be the next best option. We hope that you have heard today of the great need that is still evident in Europe. Some have said Europe has been reached and we need to move on to other regions. We would say we need to move on to other regions, but we need to continue to reach those in Europe. For there are many who do not know the Lord, and that is our mission, that is our calling. And the work that's being done by Linguæ Christi and John Robinson and the team there that serve alongside him is so valuable. We believe it is so valuable that John, we consider him a part of our church staff here in First Baptist Orange Park. But we support him, and here's my ask for you. Would you consider supporting not just John, but the entire ministry and mission of Linguæ Christi? There is a team that is on the ground. They are continually seeking and searching for those, even those in Europe who are indigenous to Europe, to join the team, to reach those in their own community. We're seeing it happen already. But here are the three major things that we need. We need prayer. Would you commit to pray regularly, weekly, daily, for the mission of Linguæ Christi, knowing that the gospel is still needed in that region of Europe and all those areas where those minority languages are spoken? Pray for them. Pray for the team members. Pray for the future team members. Pray for those that do not know the Lord. Pray for those that will be part of our family because of the gospel. Pray daily for Linguæ Christi. Well, in addition to prayer, what is also needed is provision. Like every ministry and every mission out there, funds are needed to continue the mission and to keep the work current and up to date. We need funds. You can give even now through linguaechristi.org, through the giving page. There is a secure giving option there where you can give to the different areas of ministry through Linguæ Christi or to specific missionaries that serve on the field. Would you commit to not just pray, but to provide? And the last letter P is people. We need people. John has already mentioned the need and how you can serve on the team or serve short term even now from your home. But one day soon, we hope that the travel restrictions are removed. And I'm talking now to some mission directors and some pastors who are considering where they may serve on short-term missions. I'm also talking, I believe, to some college students and some high school seniors who may be graduating soon, who are looking for a place to serve. And we always joke about, hey, how great it would be just to go backpacking across Europe. Oh, that'd be fun. But how great would it be to go backpacking across Europe with an intentional mission, serving on the field? There are places of service, not just backpacking, but serving on the team in different regions. I'm talking to college students who I'm challenging you to give your summer up, to go serve, to consider serving on a short-term mission trip, or maybe serving longer than that. So we need prayer, we need provision, and we need people. I'm asking if you would consider joining us at Linguæ Christi to serve the people in the name of Jesus Christ, so that the gospel may go to every area in Europe where majority languages are spoken and where the minority languages are spoken, those heart languages. Would you join us in that? If you have any questions or you need more information, the website is on the screen, linguaechristi.org. Go check out the website. Follow us on social media. Stay up to date with our needs. And maybe next year, it won't be a one-hour missions conference, but maybe you can join me on one of our trips, a vision trip, to see what God is doing in the region. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, John. Thank you, Kenzie. Appreciate your time you've given us today.
Thank you, both of you, for giving me the opportunity to share with you in this way. Our whole team is very grateful. Thank you.